The life of an individual is dynamic. It is filled with successes and tribulations, the exciting, the discouraging, and the mundane. Understanding the roles each of us plays in the world is an eternal and lifelong pursuit. With some, however, their impacts are significant and tangible. Some people influence the lives of others profoundly, creating changes in the world that reach many throughout time. The life of Paul Freed was certainly an example of this experience.
We are all people that are a conglomeration of where we came from.
He was a people person, guy, one of the originals.
He was always the educator.
He was as delightful a person as you want, very bright, and a joy to be with.
Paul Freed was a man who through many different areas of his life impacted the lives of countless others. Among many other accomplishments, Freed was a history professor at Hope College, the first director of international education at Hope College, and the founder of the Vienna Summer School. Through the eyes of some of his students, peers, and friends, the people who would become part of his Hope College family, his story can be retold in memories and recollections. His influence in each of their lives has been collected here and can be chronicled through the different chapters in his powerful life story.
I've been teacher in the English department at Hope College since 1972, and I have been the overseas director of the Hope College Vienna Summer School, which of course Dr. Freed started, and I've been doing that since 1976, so if I make it until May, this will be my 39th successive summer doing that program, which is now in its 58th year.
I was from Western New York, came to Hope in 1961, graduated in 1965, and in one way or another have been connected with Hope my entire life.
John was from Pennsylvania, my husband, and I was from Wisconsin. We met at the University of Wisconsin, got married, and then met Dr. Lovers. He was looking for an English teacher, and he persuaded John to come up to Hope, which we did.
I graduated from Hope College. I went on to work in both the admissions office and the advancement office. Spent about 18 years at Hope. And it was really through that association with Hope that I got to know Dr. Freed so well.
My dad went to Hope, my sister went to Hope, I'm at Hope, and I have a grandson going to Hope now. And my daughters both went to Hope, so we have a lot of connections.
I transferred to this area in 1979 with my job, and originally I had a store in Saugatuck that I started in 1979, and in 1980 that's when I met Paul Freed.
Although Freed began his experiences with Hope College as a student, he spent the majority of his time at the college as a professor of history. Beginning in 1953, Dr. Freed spent 31 years teaching classes such as Europe Between the Wars, eventually becoming the chairman of the history department in 1959.
My husband was dean, and so Paul went to him and said, I want a job teaching history. Well, my husband said, I'm sorry, but we don't have an opening in that. But he liked Paul, and they got to be very chummy, and Paul said, I'm on my way to California to find a job teaching history in California. Well, he started out, John helped him find a route to go, and he started out, and 3 days later, John got a hold of Paul and said, "Paul, turn around and come back to Holland as fast as you can. College has started. We need a history teacher." And the college has started. So that was how Paul came back and spent the rest of his life here.
He enjoyed the society here, and he helped make it in a sense. We learned a little bit of Viennese from Paul in town, and certainly at the college.
The students seemed to like him very much because he was very bright and made his course interesting, and a very popular professor.
So he wasn't only a person that helped the brilliant minds, he was interested in everybody.
He had a lot of experiences that were so vital for history students to be learning. And they found in him somebody who was just an endless source of not only stories, but living history.
I took his course in Europe between the wars, which is the subject that Paul knew the best. He was an exacting professor. He was difficult. He was smart. But worst, he lived through that era, and he would test us on whatever came into his mind. And sometimes we didn't live through that era. We had no idea what he was talking about because it wasn't in the assigned reading. He didn't talk about it in lectures, and yet we were tested on it.
He was a very strict professor, very hard, sometimes difficult to understand because of his language. It was very hard to, he was a very good teacher, but very difficult, a very strict teacher. If I'd fall asleep or something like that, he would throw a piece of chalk to make sure I was awake. But he was very good.
Very, very bright man, obviously, but he was very whimsical. He somewhat has almost an impish grin that you would not expect from someone with the kind of credentials that he had.
He was so intent on teaching people lessons they could learn from history. He really pushed students. If you look at people who were history majors from the 1950s through, right up through 1980, so many of them went on to really exciting international careers. So many people were getting doctorates in history back then, and he was a great influence on them.
I think he just followed through to make sure that I was doing the best I could possibly do. And he was always on top of me, so to speak, to make sure I was getting my assignments done. And he made classes interesting because he had lived it and been there, and he really knew his subject.
So he very much felt a part of Hope and was quite pleased to be offered a position. The first was just for 1 year, but then he was able to hold on to that and eventually became chair of the history department, head of international education. But I think his early years at Hope really defined his later connection.
I think students and his fellow faculty members admired him because he sort of rose out of his background and became a very positive influence on the college and the community and, in fact, in many ways, the world.
As a man who was influenced by and experienced many cultures throughout his life, Freed was the very definition of a global citizen. Believing that cultural understanding and international relationships are of great value, Dr. Freed made his mark on the world by fostering better appreciation in his students through facilitating diverse cultural experiences.
He ended up being the head of one of the translation units for the Nuremberg war crimes trials. His case centered around a gentleman known as Baron von Weizsäcker, and Paul had lots of people employed working with him. And again, the German and English language ability was what really got him that job. In the process, there was some downtime. He was able to take courses and do work at the University of Erlangen in Germany, so he got a PhD.
And he had to sit there and read thousands of documents and then to translate those documents into English so that they could be presented in a prosecution case. And I think that whole experience was used as education.
He was trying to work in new directions. He had definite social goals here, very humanitarian goals, and I think that inspired him. And because he did have connections all over Europe, he met a lot of important people during the Nuremberg trials, people from different countries.
And I think what motivated Paul more than anything else throughout his life was that he wanted Hope College students not to be, as he called, parochial, and that is just needing and wanting to be around people just like them. But he wanted them to experience the world, to have a world view, to think broadly, to be accepting of other people and other cultures. And he made it his lifetime work to promote that at Hope College, and he did so in such a significant way.
He opened up Europe to us, really. He got us going there. I mean, that's the best way to do it. Getting our kids over there, getting our sons and daughters over there. And you wouldn't believe the Holland I grew up in.
You know, he opened the eyes of a lot of people that there is other opportunities outside the Holland, Michigan, Coxsackie, New York, that you could travel and see the world, you know, other than through National Geographic. So I think he was encouraging a lot of people to go international to visit, and perhaps cultures might be better off as a result of that.
What really emerged was that care for people, and particularly for students, in ways of getting students to think outside the box, not to be parochial, and to get away from the overused phrase, the Holland bubble. But he did that.
Meeting people from different cultures and seeing people who have totally different backgrounds is what makes Paul Freed valuable to this institution. It's what, there's got to be 100 students here that bring their own separate culture into the institution, and that enriches the entire place. And that's what Paul wanted. That's what he was really trying to get the institution to understand. And that's what the Freed Scholarship was intended to do. We never got it funded enough to really make it worthwhile, but that was his goal.
But I think he was a force in trying to get international education. You know, like I said, my granddaughter, for example, now is going, and I've encouraged it as a result of that. My granddaughter is in Barcelona, Spain. What a neat experience that a lot of kids our age didn't have. He was lucky, I was lucky, because he kind of took me by the hand and you're going.
He brought his friends over from Europe, people that he had known along the way, and they would come over and visit, stay with Paul maybe a week or 2 weeks.
He made friends wherever he went, so he could spend basically the remaining part of the summer just going from one friend's home to another, to touring places, to studying. And I mean, he was very, very comfortable in traveling and loved to do it.
I think he also definitely had in mind the idea that in order to build a future where America and countries in Europe had long been separated because of the war, he was a way to bridge gaps.
And he built the bridge, and we've been walking on it ever since, I guess.
But I think he realized that if he was truly an ambassador of global communication and relationships, he needed to go beyond Western Europe. And when he began conversations about an overseas program in Japan, there were many connections that go way back between Hope College and Japan. And he sort of reignited those connections and thought there ought to be another option for Hope students to go abroad than just to Western Europe. And so he worked very hard to establish that whole program in Japan.
It's the very fact that he kept in touch with so many people, that he would invite them back to campus to give talks, that he would tell me, you've got to get in touch with this person in Vienna because she or he will be a dynamic speaker for your students, or you're starting to do this senior seminar class. Contact these people who were Austrian prisoners of war in the United States, and they've got stories about living in Nebraska or Louisiana and how they learned English and ended up at American universities and how they want to help American students. And it was true. And I got so many connections with people in Europe that I would never have found myself if it hadn't been for him.
I think he was pretty much dedicated to bringing people together. And not in making speeches, but doing it. And Vienna Summer School is part of it.
Perhaps the most visible of Fried's international impacts was establishing the Vienna Summer School. Beginning in 1956, with only 14 students and a single class offering, European history since 1918, the Vienna Summer School has since blossomed into one of the most popular and recognized study abroad programs in the country. The Vienna Summer School has educated thousands of students under the management of both Dr. Fried and Dr. Stephen Hemingway, offering students the opportunity to experience Western Europe in a scholastic context.
When he started doing the Vienna program, which he did in 1956, was his first summer. I think that was after his third year at Hope. He just, blossomed in new ways, had connections all over Europe, and was able to introduce students to Europeans in ways that I cannot possibly duplicate.
I had Vienna on my mind for a long time. Others, it was a big deal on campus at that time. It started in 1956, so I was in like the 8th class, and it's still going today.
It was a great experience. I mean, I attribute that to my desire to travel and see the world.
His trips were always so well organized and planned. He was a genius at that. And we always stayed in very nice places, and we saw what we should see, and he knew. He'd always studied up, and he knew what we were supposed to see, if it was cathedrals or whatever it was. And we did. He was good.
I got to know Paul Fried really well on the ship. It was a 9-day ship trip from New York to Le Havre, France. We stopped in Southampton on the way. That's a very long time to be on a boat in the North Atlantic, and half of the ship was sick, almost from the Statue of Liberty all the way. But I wasn't. And so I spent a lot of time with him on board ship. We played bridge together, we talked. Anytime Paul was doing anything, he was in a teaching mode. And you learned so much from his life experiences by him talking about the history of a particular era. And I owed him an oral exam. So I tried to avoid him, but he didn't forget. So an oral exam from a European professor is an experience you ought to have once in your life, and not more than that. And so he gave me this test on board about Europe between the wars. I was really happy to have that over with.
The year before, he had made arrangements with different families to take students in. And we were lucky we had Ma Botter, Maria Botter, her name was, and she's just a wonderful person. She must have been 5 foot tall, 5 foot wide, and every night she'd have schnapps and a little glass of schnapps to say "Schlafen Sie gut," you know, and then every morning we'd wake up with a little roll and orange marmalade. That was our breakfast.
When we got to Le Havre and we got on a bus, and then we had a 2-week study tour that was led by Paul through Northern Europe. We went to Luxembourg, France, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Germany, Austria. I mean, it was just a tremendous trip. And we put in big days. I mean, this was not a chance to go sit in a pub someplace. We really worked at it.
We toured a lot of things at the first part, and it's amazing how many people he knew and had connections with. And so we'd have, when we were actually studying Neumarkt #1, we would go out in the evening into the different palaces or different places that he had connections with and listen to lectures.
But in 1957, the second year of the Vienna Summer School, Paul Fried invited then Chancellor Bruno Kreisky of Austria to address the Vienna Summer School students. And after Kreisky did, Paul said to him, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I signed a paper back in 1938 that I would never return to Austria. And Kreisky looked him straight in the face and said, don't worry, I signed the same paper.
I was very fortunate in being chosen to go. And Paul was always so gracious, saw that I had nice places to stay, and that I was well taken care of. And I, in turn, would pass this on, hopefully, to the students that I had. Yeah.
We kept getting invitations to go on Hope alumni tours and things like that. But we had 4 kids. We had neither the means nor the time to do that, so we didn't travel. But on the 25th anniversary of the Vienna Summer School, Mother had passed away by then, and I was sent a letter asking if I would like to go on the 25th kind of as a representative of the family. And so we went, and that started it. After that, we went several times. We went, well, I think we had 13 overseas trips.
My 6th year, we had a huge 25th anniversary, and you could see how excited, he was about that. And he came over for the 40th anniversary too. We've since had a 50th and a 55th. And we just had a celebration in Vienna in February with President Knapp and Provost Ray and their wives, and over 46 people. This is thrown together quite hurriedly. 46 people, many of them Hope College alumni. People came from 7 different countries. A lot of the teachers from Vienna Summer School.
He certainly has to be given a lot of credit for starting a program that I think was very effective, and I had 3 children that graduated from Hope College, and my 2 sons also went to Vienna Summer School.
And I have a grandson going to Vienna this coming summer because of this. So it's expanded my horizon, but also gave me the encouragement to tell other people to travel to see, other people in other countries. They're all like us,
He was ideal for that summer school, and that was the first foreign program I think they'd had at Hope, and he pretty much did that on his own.
Paul was really proud of what he could do with the Vienna Summer School. I think he was really crushed when it didn't run that 20th year. That was a traumatic moment for him, and that's why he really wanted me to do it that one year to keep it going. I think he was also very, very excited when I decided to keep doing this. This program was Dr. Freed. I could not have asked for a better mentor, supporter, and to go back to that same word, friend, for taking over these duties.
Freed spent his entire adult life working toward a more humanitarian future, teaching and encouraging global understanding. However, in all the history lessons that Dr. Freed eagerly taught, the one subject that he avoided was the story of his own childhood. The Freed family, originally from wealthy roots in Germany, endured considerable strife during the youths of the three sons, eventually becoming victims to many of the horrific events that happened during World War II.
We knew he had this past in Europe, but he didn't talk a lot about it. And every so often, you'd be sitting with him somewhere and talking, and something would come up, and little bits and pieces, but never a full story of just what had happened to him.
Both of their families were Viennese, Austrian, and their ancestry was Jewish, although Paul's dad's family converted to the Reformed Church when Paul's dad was a boy, and Paul's mother's family had converted to the Lutheran Church before she was born.
His mother was an obstetrician in Germany, and she apparently had a practice that included her belief in birth control.
She had written a book on family size. She was a compatriot to Margaret Sanger here in the States. All those books were burned by Hitler because it was on like one child per family, which was very anti-Hitler.
His dad and mother moved to Austria, and his dad became an editor of some kind of Austrian newspaper. He came out strongly before, during, and after the Anschluss between Germany and Austria. He came out strongly against it. And that was not something the Nazis appreciated. So Paul never knew why they were arrested.
They were marked people from the start. And so he was always under this shadow from, I would say, his early teenage.
Paul H. Freed, the father, had been arrested in Germany. Though he was released, the Freed family was deported, which led to their financial struggle. The family plummeted from vast wealth in Germany to becoming nearly destitute in Austria. By the time Paul G. Freed was in high school, his brother Julius and he were the only Freeds remaining in Vienna. Hoping to avoid suspicion and arrest, Emily Freed, Paul's mother, and the youngest brother Fritz were living in Moscow, while Paul H. resided in Prague. One day, Nazi soldiers came looking for Paul H. Freed.
I can bring to bear what he actually wrote longhand about what happened to him as he was writing a whole segment on his childhood, in case anyone else was interested. So I'll just read that to you. It's hard to say how my life would have developed had Austria remained free. As it was, the Anschluss, which was the annexation of Austria into Nazi Germany, in March of 1938, quickly ended that phase of my experiences. About 6 a.m. one morning, shortly after Hitler had arrived in Vienna, I awoke to find two plainclothes policemen standing next to my bed. They confirmed that I was indeed Paul Freed and told me to get dressed and to come with them for an examination. Since my father's name, which was also Paul, was on the Nazi blacklist, I expect they really wanted him. But he was safely in Czechoslovakia at that point, and even the wrong Paul Fried was probably better than to arrest no one. The rest of his family had left. He said, it was 6 weeks before I left the police station. And after a kindly old lawyer paid a bribe that was provided by a clergyman who had arranged for my release. When I was released, it was on the condition that I leave Austria at once and promise not to return or make any claims against the government. I gladly signed the necessary paper, though leaving Austria was not that simple a matter. I did not have a passport. In any way, with the annexation of Austria, I had become a stateless person. Thus, I could not apply for a visa or go anywhere or enter another country legally. However, from the police point of view, this was no obstacle. Early in the morning, on the day of my release, 2 detectives took 3 others and me to the train station and went with us by train to a small village near the Czech frontier. We then walked for what seemed hours before coming to a forest, and there, one by one, we were told to cross over into Czech territory. We were warned not to let the Czechs catch us because they would lock us up, and if we tried to get back into Austria, the Germans would lock us up. So that's the way he told that particular story.
Paul eventually made it to Prague and briefly reunited with his family before pursuing work in England to get out of a still dangerous country. During his time in England, he found connections to working at a Swedish missionary society that allowed him to receive a scholarship to Hope College. He arrived to begin school at Hope in 1940.
He's gone from Vienna to Czechoslovakia to London.
He showed up at the train station with a suitcase he said, in his hand, and he was leaving the depot right down here on 8th Street, and somebody offered to give him a ride, and he asked him where he was going. He said, well, to Hope College. And that was his first inclination as to what Hope College was going to be for him for the remainder of his educational life.
He then becomes just adopted by the Hope College community.
He was fortunate in that there was an arrangement made with Hope College, the president of Hope College at that time, that the college would basically not charge him tuition, but he was solely responsible for all of his living expenses and everything else.
And he worked in a bakery on 8th Street. He worked in restaurants, washing dishes and things. He took very menial tasks, and he came from a well-educated, cultured family. But he did all these things and you know, looked in the best light at it. It was his way to get the education that he wanted.
Sometimes he's working 3 jobs. He's bicycling to Zeeland to work a job. He's working in the Warm Friend Hotel, downtown, which he ended up doing assisted living there many years later. A full-time student. And I mean, day after day, he's writing letters to organizations all over the world, in this country and in Europe, trying to get his mother, father, and 2 brothers out.
He had a mother who was interested in birth control, and he had a father who was interested in truth, and wrote about it, and they lost their lives for it. That's pretty significant. His line always was, I don't want to talk about that. And the reason he didn't want to talk about it, it was just plain too painful.
We honor all these students who are 6th and 7th generation students. He's a 1st generation student, but Hope saved his life. Hope gave him an education. He dropped out of Hope as a sophomore to enlist in the U.S. Army even before he was an American citizen. He came back to finish his degree after he had served in the war. He was very much a part of Hope College and writes a lot in his letters about Hope and Holland, Michigan really being his new home.
Many times he would say that Hope College is his family. Hope College is my family, and that's why I think he always returned here.
If you step back and think of his story from the time of being a young man in Germany, a very well-educated, aristocratic family, to having the Nazis basically take over his family. It was a mansion. For him to escape out of Germany independently, to basically spend most of his life not knowing whether his parents or brothers were still alive or not. And then to come to Holland, Michigan, to Hope College, and basically, I think, transform the Hope College campus and make it into a place where students can leave with a global perspective is really amazing. He really kind of fulfilled almost an American dream, and that is transforming from someone who coming in had, it would appear, would have very little opportunity to really creating opportunities for himself. And he did, and did it very successfully.
It is easy to reduce a person's life to a list of achievements or a collection of interesting stories. The memories that are often most powerful, however, focus less on timelines and more on experiences. While Freed's family was lost to him early in life, he was able to create a new family of friends around himself during his time at Hope College. Memories of time spent together, personality traits, and experiences come to the forefront of the important recollections.
He had a very large home on 12th Street, right across from Centennial Park, a 4-story home, absolutely packed full with books and art treasures and all sorts of things.
He had a library full of rare books and rare prints. He had an original Goethe. He had a lot of stuff. There was hardly room to sit, but he had, he had a bar that came from Japan, and he had a horse or an elephant that came from India on the floor. I mean, it was just a truly eclectic place. And what he would say is, the reason I have that, I mean, his walls were just covered with stuff. The reason I have that is I can sit in my chair and I can look around and I can say Paris, Vienna, Rome, Japan. And so he didn't care that it didn't match. That didn't make any difference.
And he would have people in, and he would have a plate of cheese and a glass of wine, and it would be a nice social evening.
He had a graciousness about him that really reflected his European background. So role of host came very natural to him. And so he looked for opportunities to show people around Holland and to make them feel comfortable and actually invite them up to his apartment for a glass of wine and all those kinds of things, because it was just a part of who he was.
I could drive by Paul's house, and if Paul was out on his front porch reading, which he did an awful lot if you knew where he used to live on 12th Street. And he would sit there and read, and if the light was on, I could stop. We'd go in the house, and he would either put on Tannhauser, a lot of times it was Wagner opera, and we would sit there and drink and talk, and then sometimes I could lay down on the couch and we'd still talk.
He, at the end of the summer, he would always, you'd see him in a new Mercedes convertible, which I learned that he regularly brought back from Vienna, and he loved his cars and he loved driving around.
Dr. Freed bought a Mercedes quite often, and then he'd have it shipped back here, and I don't know what the rules and regulations were on those cars in those days, but he was able to buy them, ship them back here, and then he'd resell them. after he drove them a year. Then he'd buy another one when he'd go back there.
So whenever Paul made a tour of Europe, somebody in town would have him buy them a car, a European Volkswagen or a Mercedes or BMW, something like that. And Paul would do that under this stipulation that while he had it there, he could drive it in Europe. And sometimes he had almost a fleet of cars because he was doing it for 3 or 4 people.
His early retirement years were very full. He was very involved with the HASP, the Hope Academy for Senior Professionals. He was one of the founders of HASP. He did a lot with the college and kept in touch with college students, with the International Education Program. Towards his later years, there were some, quite honestly, some dementia issues that came in where his memory began to wane, and he wasn't able to participate in a lot of the college activities that he wanted, and that ended up somewhat redefining his retirement years. His physicians and caregivers said he can no longer really maintain himself in that home independently. He needs to go to a care center. And I very quickly had to find a place for him to go. And I was thrown into pretty much the decision-making role. So luckily, there was an opening here at the Warm Friend, and we had to go from about a 12-room, packed full home to a 1-bedroom studio apartment.
Whatever it was, he accepted it. It was, okay, this is the way it is. I'd even go visit him in places and he'd say, oh, this is a wonderful place, you know. It'd be a little nursing home or just a room. He always thought it was just fine, you know.
And I'll never forget the day that I had an estate sale at his place. He was at the Worm Friend, and I looked up in the middle of this estate sale, and there were hundreds of people going through and rifling through books and treasures. And at one point, I went over to him and I said, is it not just tearing you apart to see literally a lifetime of collection from all over the world go out the front door? And I'll never forget his response. He said, when you have lost your entire family and all of your possessions once in your life, this becomes stuff. And he said, I'm okay letting my stuff go.
And as his memory failed, that was his final problem, was loss of memory. I never knew whether he knew me or not. But you'd have thought I was his second cousin, you know, the way he'd welcomed me and all. And I think he did that to everybody. He was just a nice person and very gracious.
Here at the Worm Friend, I think he felt very welcomed. I think he enjoyed his time here, but it also was more confining than he wanted. And yet, because of his age and health issues, it was really the best he could do.
We would go to the Mermaid Bar and Grill, and he would sit out on the sidewalk along the river and just put his head back. And you have no idea where his mind was. I mean, was he sitting next to the Danube? I mean, he just enjoyed it. And like I said, you have no idea what he's thinking about.
And then, of course, he was transferred to the care center because of his memory. And it was so hard for me because he was such a brilliant man to have his memory go. That would have been the last thing I would have thought would happen to him, but it did.
I was with him just a few days before he passed away, and I think we were watching television, and we said almost nothing for an hour, and then I got up to go, but I may have taken his hand and said that I was leaving. And he turned to me and he said, Wiedersehen. And that was his last word that I had from him.
When you think about someone who at age 15 had to escape out of Nazi Germany and on his own and not knowing the English language, coming to the States, finding eventually his way to Hope College, going on and completing a degree, serving in the Nuremberg trials in the 50s, becoming a highly distinguished professor of history, starting the Vienna Summer School program in international ed. And throughout that, there was never any bitterness. He always felt as though he had been dealt maybe not a very affirming set of cards early in his life, but he wasn't going to dwell on that. He was going to rise above it.
He carried on and didn't let it ruin his life, and for that we're grateful.
I think his impact is certainly there. In fact, I'd say it's legendary, but he was maybe the last person to realize this or think about it or try to do this in ways that would bring some kind of honor or glory to him. He was very unassuming.
He was a community person in the best sense of the word. The community of Hope College, the community of Holland, and he connected back to his home in Vienna and went there every summer for many, many years. And that program was a spectacular program with a tremendous value. I can't tell you what I got out of that. It was just enormous.
He's the one that started this in international education here in Holland, in Hope College, and I just think it's a good thing to remember and to be thankful for his vision for what's going on in education and what we should be doing and opening up opportunities for students.
He had a huge influence on this place. Sometimes they name buildings after people and that kind of thing, and you wonder why they do it. But in his case, believe me, he really influenced Hope College.
And I was fortunate that I was able to have my wife know him and have our kids. Most of our kids knew him quite well. And he would, our son that lives in China, and Paul would sit down and talk for hours. They just had a wonderful time together.
More than any professor at Hope College, he influenced my life. And I'll bet there are hundreds of students that say the same thing.
Freshman year, my father passed away, and so he kind of took me under his wing from then on, and it got me through Hope College, really, basically. I wasn't the best student in the world, but he made me do what I had to do to get through.
Paul might have found in us a closeness, companionship, and I think that's a special bond, And like I said, at one time, I can remember after my dad died, and Paul said, well, I'll be your dad from now on.
I'm pleased that his legacy may go on through documentaries like this, through books that are being written, and recollections of those that knew him best being told on to the next generation.
I think to have as much as we can in his words is also important, and that's what I'm trying to do with the book. I've been working on this, it seems like forever. I finally do have a publisher. It's divided into about 30 chapters, and some of them are chronological because that makes sense, things about his boyhood in Germany. He left a lot of notes about things like that, his refugee status in Czechoslovakia and England. He first came to America, to Cleveland, where he worked for the Hebrew Mission, his Hope College pre-war studies, his Army experiences, graduate studies starting at Hope. But I also have passages, a whole chapters just on his love of automobiles. There's a whole section just on books, art, and music. There's a whole section just on food and beverages. He was a very hospitable person. And he kept records of just like every dinner, like the cost of asparagus or whiskey or whatever for a dinner. It's just really interesting to see all of these things. I've got a section near the very end that probably most of those passages could be in other parts of the book, but I call it Philosophical and Religious Thoughts. And it was just kind of a way of putting together at the very end of the book some of the maybe more profound kinds of things. And so it's an attempt to give a picture of the whole person. It's mostly in Paul's own words, quoting from letters. I read over 10,000 letters that he wrote. And this is a lost art today. We all communicate by email, but he had long letters. Paul's letters are just so candid, personal, detailed, descriptive. It's a different era.
He was just a very special, wonderful person. I loved him very much.
There's never going to be another Paul Freed. I mean, his background is truly unique. So you can't clone him, but Doc is as close as you get.
I think what's important is that here's somebody who's arrested, thrown into jail because of a Jewish heritage, even though he is a baptized Protestant Christian. Somebody who is abandoned at the border of another country, given a chance, but then has to kind of make his way in this strange land, and then get to another country and another country before he finally begins to have a life of his own and gets that interrupted to go and fight in a war. I think it's the basic facts of his life that are important. Again, that's where I think he would say, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And maybe that's fate, and maybe it's providence, but you do with that what you can.
But I found in the, I believe, around 7 years that I walked with Dr. Freed, he became a family member. And I just came to so admire him, and I learned so much from him.
Life's an adventure if you make it. And Paul, that was Paul.